Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Deborah Uber, the Education Coordinator for the Embryo Adoption Awareness Center. We're excited to have you here this morning and very pleased to bring you an update to one of our popular webinars, The Benefits of Early Decision Making, where we will be focusing on how to help patients develop a clear and certain plan for their embryos in the event of any expected life changes. Our presenter today is attorney and business entrepreneur Ronald Stoddart. Mr. Stoddart established one of the first mobile medical device businesses, building it to a multi-million-dollar corporation before selling it to GE. After achieving success in the corporate world, he decided to shift his focus and use his law degree to practice adoption law for the past 30 years. Mr. Stoddart learned about the ever-growing number of embryos in frozen storage in the United States and again used his legal and entrepreneurial talents to pioneer the first embryo donation and adoption program in the world. He is very well qualified to present on this topic today. Now, before I hand the presentation over, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation using the questions you submit through the Q&A feature. You may submit your questions at any time during the session, and we will answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, simply click on the Q&A panel in the lower right-hand portion of the screen, type your question into the dialog box, and click the Send button. If you happen to be in the full screen view, you can click on the question mark icon on the toolbar in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. This will open the Q&A panel on your screen only. When you submit your question, it will be visible to all of the panelists but not visible to other attendees. And we do expect this presentation to last around 30 minutes with 15 minutes for Q&A. We will distribute a copy of today's presentation and a comprehensive list of any answers to questions submitted today during the webinar. If you experience any technical difficulties during the presentation, please contact WebEx Technical Support at 866-229-3239. Just as a reminder, this presentation is being recorded today. So Ron, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you today. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Deb. It's a pleasure to be here and to discuss this very important topic. Patients need to know what decisions have to be made about their remaining embryos. Now, I changed the wording of that a little bit because the slide says patients know they need to make decisions about their remaining embryos. But usually we'll look at what we've written, and as we examine it, we see that, well, maybe that's not true. And in fact, I think that one of the problems that we face is that patients don't know that they need to make decisions about their remaining embryos. Therefore, it is extremely important that as we go through these slides, we keep in mind that a subtitle of this presentation could very well be Expect the Unexpected. So even if they know that a decision is necessary, why is it so hard for many of them to make those decisions? Well, to begin with, like most of us, patients will delay making a decision until they know that it has reached crisis proportions and that it's really urgent that they make it. So what are some of the reasons that a patient would want to delay making the decision? Well, certainly a patient that you're working with for infertility has become used to being out of control. They want to start a family, they want to get pregnant, it isn't happening. They may go through a number of tests, they may be taking drugs, and it's still not happening. So they are used to being uncertain about their future, whether they'll be able to be pregnant or not. So fear and uncertainty is one of the dominant emotions that affect patients. There could be fear of regretting their decision. So if they make a decision as to the disposition of remaining embryos, there's a fear that it's not the right decision. There's a fear that their circumstances may change and that they may wish that they would have made a different decision. Certainly, unless they are very well-informed and strong, they may lack confidence in their ability to make a big decision like this. And for a married couple, it certainly is very important that they be able to communicate well and be on the same page to boost that confidence. Lack of information leads to avoiding making a decision. because there'll always be that desire for more information. Are there alternative choices to the one that I'm thinking might make sense for me? What options do we have? What other options do we have? Are there still more options that are available to us? And of course, the crucial question, do we really have to decide right now? To help a patient reach a decision, it's important to ask them questions. What decisions do they need to make? The key decision that they have to make is, do they want to use the embryos for their own family building? Well, certainly they've created the embryos to use for their own family building. The question becomes, once they have built their family, are they really done? Will the circumstances change? Will they want to maybe use those embryos sometime in the future for their own family building? If not, if they have definitely made the decision that they're done, they've had all of the children that they want to have, or that they just don't want to try again, do they have a plan for their remaining embryos? If a couple is still considering using their remaining embryos for themselves to build their own family, it is critical that they still be made aware of the choices that are available to them. At the beginning, I mentioned that a subtitle could very well be "Expect the Unexpected." You may have patients that have decided, I'm going to use all of the embryos I create to build our family. But that decision may be influenced by intervening events that make them reconsider. So if they are going to use the embryos themselves, they need to have the information, but they don't need to actually make the decision. But once a patient has made the decision that their family is complete, or they're done trying, then the question becomes, of all of the alternatives that are available to them, which one makes the most sense to them? The reason that having this information at the very beginning, before they have even had their first transfer, is because we need to expect the unexpected and realize that the time may come, and sometimes quicker than we would expect, when they do need to make the decision what to do with remaining embryos. So this decision is they need to contemplate this decision, to have the information, even before they've made the decision that their family is complete. Once they've made that decision and said our family is complete or we're done trying, then the choices that are available to them may seem to be pretty well defined. Continue to store the embryos, donate to another couple, donate to scientific research, or thaw and destroy them. But it's much more difficult than just looking at that list of choices. Again, the best way to help families to make a decision is not providing a list of features and benefits, but by asking them questions. This is an extremely personal decision for them, and one that they will probably rethink many times throughout their life. You start by, how do you feel about the options that are available to you? Well, the more certain they are about what they want to do, the more positive and confident that they will feel about the options that are presented. Is there something that is holding you back from making a decision? What is that something? That something might be, well, we have 3 children now and we think that's enough. But who knows, 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, we may make the decision that we want an even larger family. How would you know if you made the right decision? Well, you can use your own life experience and explain to them that we rarely know if we made the right decision. We can always look back and second-guess decisions that we have made. But the right decision is one that we were comfortable with at the time, that was well thought out. It was made with plenty of information. It was made with the support of our partner. That's the right decision. And what would be the biggest benefit to your family to make a decision now? That goes to the timing of the decision. Families should be encouraged to make the decision as soon as they're ready to make the decision. They should never be forced to make a decision before they are confident and before they're ready. Although they should know that putting off the decision is not going to make the decision easier. Once a patient is no longer interested in using their embryos, putting off their decision will only put them at risk for losing control of their options. All you have to do is look at the headlines to see the number of cases where there are lawsuits filed by typically celebrities, because those are the ones that make the news, where what was planned for the use of embryos that they created is no longer agreed to by both parties. So the longer they delay making the decision, the more intervening factors there may be that make that decision more difficult. Families that are just paying the storage bill think that they can put off the decision until later because they would rather pay the storage bill than actually have to decide. But they are always at risk for a crisis occurring, the unexpected happening, and being put in a position where the payment for storage is the least of their concerns. One of the things that can happen, and believe it or not, as emotional as this is not the factor that makes it the most difficult, but that is when there is a death of one of the owners of the embryos. In the case of the death of one of the owners, the burden will then be passed to the surviving spouse or the person, the co-owner of the embryos, if you will. This can be a very difficult decision for the remaining partner who is grieving the loss of their loved one. I mean, we face this whenever there is a death of a loved one. We look around and think, gee, I wish I would have asked them more questions. I wish I knew more of what they would have wanted. And we feel that additional burden not only of making what we think is the best decision, but of making a decision that we think would have been pleasing to them. You need to know that the legal status of an embryo is still pretty uncertain in the United States. Typically, the courts have held that embryos are governed by property law and therefore by the contract law, where an embryo is property, but it's property entitled to special consideration in terms of determining the disposition or the use of that embryo. In the case of the death of both owners, embryos are usually handled as part of the estate unless there's clear direction otherwise. The fate of the remaining embryos can be included in a trust or a will that is set up by the embryo owners. However, most people find that being in control themselves and having made the decisions themselves is a far more comfortable conclusion than leaving this up to their heirs. The heirs may very well be affected by the possibility that the estate would be diluted if there were more heirs. So families that have embryos, couples, need to be put in a position where they can make the decision ahead of time and made themselves. What is the difference between a trust and a will? Well, usually people that have real property or property that has title that goes with it will prefer to use a trust, because then you can avoid probate and the property will transfer to whoever they designate based on the terms of that trust. If somebody doesn't have a trust, they can put a will together. You can do that yourself. But a will needs to be probated. In other words, it needs to go to the court, and the court has to make the decision. What does the terms of the will call for? So you're going to involve the legal system. If a family still wants to use their embryos, I believe that a trust is the best way for them to safeguard whatever backup plan they may develop. Again, the difference between a trust and a will, the will is handled within the court system in a procedure called a probate. The option for the families to dispute the decision is easier with a will because there is a probate, there's already a court proceeding. So heirs or people who are maybe disinherited have the right to go into court and challenge whatever the disposition is that was indicated in the will. And there's always the danger that somebody will put a will together and not even be thinking of the embryos, so the embryos may not even be mentioned. And then you may have a dispute between heirs as to the use of those embryos. And as I said earlier, the potential that their share of the estate would be diluted if the embryos were to be born. If the patient indicates that they would prefer that their embryos be disposed of or donated for research, this is something that can be usually handled within your clinic. And I'm sure that you have procedures within the clinic to have the patient sign some sort of a form indicating that this is what they want to do, and fill out the required forms that your clinic has established. If they decide that they would like those embryos donated to another family, then of course there's a myriad of questions that come up, such as who's going to make the decision as to whether what family the embryos would be given to. And let me back up for just a moment. If we were just talking about death of one of the owners of the embryos, donation to another family is typically a decision that is made when both parties are still alive, but they've just completed their own family. It's helpful for a family that has gotten to the point of deciding what to do with their embryos to have information as to all of the choices, certainly, but if they are looking at donation, they should look at what their rights are, what the different donation programs look like. Your clinic may very well have a donation program, and you can explain to them whether or not it's only an anonymous program, or whether they would have the right to participate in the selection of the receiving family. And it's important that if they go through this process, that they work with an attorney to make sure that both their rights and the rights of the receiving family are protected. Again, we need to expect the unexpected. Now, patients that have included their wishes, for instance, if they do not go through a donation program while they're alive, but indicate in their trust or in their will that they would like their embryos to be donated for implantation, transfer to another family, they have to be pretty specific as to who's going to have the responsibility for selecting the family. It is very helpful if they complete the clinic's forms as to their genetic background, authorization to release information to either the attorney or the agency or the other clinic that's going to be handling the transfer to the other family, and that they sign the required HIPAA release forms. Certainly, if in case of an unexpected death, it is more difficult to donate the embryos unless they have completed these forms and and they have made it very clear in their trust or their will that this is what they want to have done. Now, this next slide gets us to the crux of the problem. When you have the owners of the embryos are still alive, are still together, you would think, well, then there really isn't any problem in delaying the decision because they can always look at the facts and make their decision later on. However, that is not reality. Reality is that even among families that go through fertility work, in fact, probably at a greater rate because of the stress that that can cause a relationship, there is divorce involved with couples that have created embryos. When there is divorce, there is a dispute. It is rare, actually, that there is an amicable separation and that everything is handled amicably. Embryo donation becomes much more difficult because it cannot occur if both of the owners do not consent and agree to the disposition of the embryos. If the co-owners do agree, they have to still agree on the details of the donation process, such as who's going to receive the embryos, who's going to make the decision as to who the recipient family is going to be, what kind of contact is there going to be with the family that receives the embryos and the family that is raising the child or the children that will hopefully be born as a result of the transfer of those embryos. When the courts become involved in a divorce, if the parties agree, it is pretty straightforward that the court can enter into the order of dissolution the terms of the disposition of the embryos. For instance, a person can be appointed guardian over the embryos and empowered with the authority to make the decision as to who those embryos are going to go to or who's going to make the ultimate decision. The difficulty becomes, again, if they do not agree. If the family or the couple that created the embryos do not agree, the courts are divided as to what the disposition of the embryos are going to be. It's important, I think, to have an understanding of some of the factors that the court is going to take into consideration. For instance, if the wife or the mother of the embryos, the owner of the eggs that were used, wants to use the embryos herself, and the husband does not want those embryos used, typically the court is going to side with the husband because their policy position is they don't want to force someone to become a parent against their will. When the wife has an argument that she is no longer able to produce eggs or to achieve a pregnancy, typically it's for medical reasons, then the court will also look at what they consider the last chance of the woman to become a mother. And the eggs were perhaps taken and the embryos were created when she was able to produce eggs, but now she's not. That will weigh against the husband's argument of saying that he does not want to be forced to be a father. So which side will the court come down on? Flip a coin. Expect the unexpected, which is, again, why it is so important that the families look at the potential for disputes, the risks involved, and be as specific as they can in developing an agreement or instructions on disposition well in advance of that kind of event occurring. Creating embryos and building a family is a happy thing to be involved in. We all love to look at the babies that result from our work. Nobody likes to look at a fight in progress, and particularly a fight between people who entered into this whole process with the best of intentions. The way to avoid this is to provide the couple the most information possible in the beginning, suggest that they get counseling to review the what-ifs to help them expect the unexpected, and to do that cute little thing that we all learned in school, plan ahead. If they do plan ahead, if they do come to an agreement, that agreement, if reduced to writing and signed, will heavily influence the court in making a decision consistent with what the parties had agreed to in advance. If it's ambiguous or there was no agreement, then they're at the mercy of the court, and they are going to experience what they didn't want, and that is a surprise. Deb, why don't we see if there's any questions, or whether we have been so comprehensive we've just completely covered every question that anyone could have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ron. I am going to take over the slides really quickly so I can get some time. I think you were pretty comprehensive about the whole thing, so I don't really foresee any questions, but just so viewers are aware, we do have some future events coming up. Just this next week, we are going to have a webinar on grieving the loss of a genetic child, which is for more of your patients that are still experiencing infertility and they haven't had success with IVF yet, and they may need to consider either donor egg, donor sperm, or donor embryo. And in that situation, a lot of families usually struggle, and couples usually struggle to let go of that genetic connection in a child. So we have a webinar that's specifically focused towards that. We would be happy to have you join, or any of your patients join. And then we also have a great educational tool for your patients and for your offices at pathwaytofamily.org. It is a magazine that is specifically focused on infertility and different options that they'll have available. So you can go to that website, www.pathwaytofamily.org, and you'll be able to receive a free magazine sent to your office, or you can also view it on a tablet, computer, whatever you're using. So I think that about wraps everything up this morning. Thank you so much, Ron, for joining us. I really appreciate it, and I hope that it's very helpful for everybody that watches this.